Welcome to our Training Tuesdays. Today's session is on Dynamics GP Table Finder. Laura, let me introduce you, and you can take it on from there. Laura is one of our technical consultants at Endeavour. Has been with us for a number of years and is a fantastic technical, but also knows much of the accounting and ins and outs of GP, helping clients with their reporting needs. Over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Scott. So before we dive in, I'm just going to hop over. Oh, it's right there. Okay. So before we dive in, I want to show a sample of what we will be building today. So while we will be focusing on finding the data for the report, our final Excel report will look like the following. We'll have inventory and account data on one tab, and on another tab, we're just going to have some pivot table and pivot chart samples just to show you some of the capability within Excel. So the first step in building reports is understanding the underlying data structure for GP. So if we look at our databases here, we can see that first we have a Dynamics database. And this will be the general system database for the whole GP application. The data you'll see in here relates to multi-currency setup, intercompany setup, and details for the different companies. So you can see that I also have a 2 database, which is going to be the Fabricam limited test data that you can get out of GP. And you're going to have one database per GP company. So in this case, I only have the one GP company, but if you have many, then you'll see that number of databases here in this list. And the data in this database is from information entered into GP, such as transactions, accounts, customers, or vendors, anything that corresponds with the specific company. So if we look at some details on the tables, we can see that there's over 1,000 tables within this database. And you're going to see that same number in each of your company databases, and the table structures will look exactly the same. So all the tables will match. And you might be looking at this and thinking that the naming convention looks quite odd, but there is actually a pattern that they use. And what they do is first you have a prefix for the module within GP. So it'll either be 2 or 3 letters at the beginning of the table name. And in this case, if we look at the top, we can see that it's GL. So this corresponds with the general ledger module. So this is going to be all of your finance data. And if we scroll down a bit more, we can see that there's quite a few that use the IV prefix. And this is going to be the inventory module, so it'll have details on items. After that, you'll see that there's normally a whole bunch of numbers that follows that prefix. Well, if we look at the first number, in this case it's GL0, so the first number would be 0. This number actually corresponds with a table type. So when it's 0, that's going to be a master table. So that's a permanent record in GP, like items and accounts, and it's going to be used with our transactions. After that, we'll see that there's some that start with a 1. When it starts with a 1, then that's the work table. So these are unposted transactions, so they can be considered work in progress. After that, there's the ones that start with a 2. These are going to be our open tables, so they are posted transactions that are not yet closed and they haven't moved to history. And then when it starts with a 3, then these are the history tables. So these are completed transactions. And we'll notice that there are a few others, such as ones that start with 4, 5, and 7. But these ones mostly correspond with setup tables or temporary data, stuff that we likely won't need for reports. But if we do, then by the end of today, you will know how to find them. So as an example, if we're looking for items and we want to know what table to go to get data for items, well, items is likely going to be in the inventory module. So we know that it's probably going to start with IV. So we can look for the tables that start with IV. And then from there, we know that the item is actually a permanent record that's going to be used within our transactions. So it's probably a master table. So it'll start with IV0. However, if we look at this list, we do see quite a few that start with IV0. And while that's definitely an improvement from the over 1,000 tables that we started with, you might not want to go through and look at each one individually. So we can go over to GP, and there's a few really cool resources that we can use to figure that out. So if you press the GP button, come into Tools, and then down below, there is the Table Finder, which we'll be getting to shortly, which is the Smart List Builder add-on. But there's also the resource descriptions, which I want to touch on because that is in every GP install. And you can filter down by tables, fields, or windows. So as long as you know either the table name, a field name, or the window that you want to get the data from, then you can get all the other data that you need. So if we're continuing with the item criteria, we can go to Inquiry and Inventory and our item. So if we just pull up this screen in GP, we can see that the name of the window is always going to be at the top. So the name of the window is Item Inquiry. And we can see some potential fields that we might be interested in. For example, the item number. If I just go over to one of the first items that we have, we can see that the item number is actually going to be the identifier that we're going to use so that we know which item we're looking at. So I'll just exit out of this, and we can go back to Tools, Resource Descriptions, and I'll start by looking at the fields because I know that the field is called item number. So you're going to have some options here for filtering. So we can specify the product, which we're going to leave as GP. We don't want to look at any external add-ons. And then you can select the core module. So it's system right now, but I actually want inventory. From here, it's going to update this fields list. So it's going to show every single field that is in the inventory module. So it is quite a large list, but it is alphabetical, so I can find my item number. It's right here. Once I click on that, it's going to update down here. So I now know all the tables that contain this field. But it is still quite a large list. So I can kind of guess. I know it's going to be about items, and I have an idea that it's going to be the master. So maybe it's this one, but we can dig into that a bit further later on. There's also a field info button. So we can click on that, and we get a few more details. So we know that the type is going to be a string, which is basically just a text value, and that the keyable length is going to be 30. So you can't go past 30 characters in this field. So that gave us some details, and we have an idea that maybe the table is the item master, but there is quite a few tables here. So now let's look at the window side of things, because we know that name as well. So we'll go to Resource Descriptions, and then Windows. And this is going to look pretty similar to what we saw for the field descriptions. So we can see that we can filter down, and then it's going to update this box. And then from there, we can select a specific window, and it will show us the fields and the tables. So we're going to leave the product as GP. In the series, we'll select inventory. And then what we're viewing by, this is actually going to sort this box that we're showing in here. So we have some options, but I'm going to leave it as the Windows display name because that's what we know. And I can just scroll through this list like we did over here. But in the Windows descriptions, we have the option to press this Find button, at which point we can filter down on a specific one. And since I know that the name is Item Inquiry, I can type that in. And also, just so you know, this is case sensitive, so you're going to want to pay attention to where things are lowercase and uppercase and make sure you type it exactly right. And you don't have to type the whole thing. If I wanted to, I could just type this, and it would look for the ones that start with that. So I'll press Find. And now I see my Item Inquiry is here on the top. So I'll just click on that, and now I see all the fields and all the tables that are on that window. So now my tables list is a lot smaller, and you might notice that they look a little different. Well, that's because on the field description, it's showing the tables by the display name. So these are the friendly names that you would expect from GP, whereas in the Windows description, the table names are listed by their technical names. And so this is what is used in the background. So this is the GP code refers to it as IV_item_MSTR. And when I look at the names, I feel like that most likely links up with Item Master, and that sounds like the one that I'm most interested in for getting the item details. So I'll just move these off to the side, and now we can dig into that third option that we had. So again, GP button, Tools, Resource Descriptions. And then we'll go to tables. Now this one looks a lot different from the other two that we had. Just pull those up quickly. You can see that these ones kind of had some filtering options, and then it kind of went into more of the details, whereas this one, you're actually going to specify a table, and it's showing the details for that table. So where we haven't selected a table yet, there's nothing showing. So in order to select it, we actually have to press this ellipsis button, the 3 dots, and this will open up a separate window. So we press that, and now we have possible table names showing up. And this looks a lot more similar to what we're used to. So now we can enter the product, GP, that looks good. For series, we're going to select inventory. And for the view by, we have some different options here. And actually what I'm going to want is the technical name, because what we have over here is the technical name. So I'm going to change this to that. And you might notice that right now there's one record is taking up one line, but we can see up here that there's 2 lines of possible values it could show us. So right now we're only seeing the display name, physical name, and the table group down below on the highlighted row. But if I click this button here, it's going to expand out so that one record takes up 2 lines. And now I can see the technical name, which is the field that I want to match on, and then also the table group technical name. So this gives me a bit more detail, so it depends on what you're looking for. If you want more data to show up in this grid, then this button is great, but this one is good for if you need that technical name or the table group technical name. So from here, we have a Find button again. So I'm going to click on that because I don't want to scroll through everything. And I'm going to type in the technical name that we had over in our window description. So IV underscore item underscore MSTR. So now we can see at the top of our grid, we have the item master, the IV underscore item underscore MSTR, which lines up with the table names that we got from the window description and the field description. And now we get our physical name. So we know that the IV00101 is the table that we need from GP. So now we've narrowed it down. Instead of having, I think it was about 10 different options that started with IV0, we now know exactly where to go within SQL. So now that we have that highlighted, we'll click OK. And this will update all of this information. So now we can drill into more details for this specific table. We can see that the key for the table is the item number, and we can see some field details. In the field column, we get the friendly name, which will be more similar to what we're used to seeing in GP. And in the physical name column, we're going to see how the field shows in the database table itself. So for example, the item number field is actually item NMBR in the database. And similar to when we were on the field description, they have a field info button, which if you click on that, it's going to show the same details so we can see that it's the string with 30 as the length. We have a few more details on the screen as well. We can look at additional info, which shows us any relationships that the item master table has with other tables. So right now it's showing the account master, but there's a few other options that you can drill down on. So I can see that if I use the IV index from the item master, then I can use that to link with the account master table. So this will be useful later on because when we build our report, we might want to tie in accounts with our items. So I'll just close out of that, and I'll move this down. So this is a really great resource because you get it out of the box with GP. It's available for everyone. It shows the data that you need to get. However, it is a lot of clicking around. There's a lot of screens that you need to open up. So sometimes it is lacking a little bit of that user friendliness that we might want. So that is where the Smart List Builder add-on Table Finder comes in useful. So to get to that, it's back to the GP button, Tools, Table Finder. So down here, I'm just going to bring up the other two for comparison. So this is basically merging all of the resource descriptions into one screen, which is nice because you don't have to open up multiple screens. And there's a few different find options. Right now we're on window, but you can also do it by field name and field value. We can filter in on our options like we're used to from the other resource descriptions. So product will be GP. Series will be inventory. Form, this is going to be the window name that we had, so we're going to look for the item inquiry. And this one, unfortunately, it doesn't have a find button, but luckily it's not too hard to find. There's not too many in the inventory section. And now we'll see that everything else on the screen has updated. And what we have is a list of tables here on the left-hand side. And then all of the details on the right-hand side correspond with what we're used to seeing in the table description. So now we've narrowed in on a specific window. We can see all the tables and get the field information. And you'll notice that as I click through the table section, all the information on the right-hand side will update. So this is great because we don't have to jump between multiple screens. I can click on the item master, and then this all updates. So I know that the SQL name is IV00101. I know that there's 228 records in it, and I can find all the field name details, as well as the little key icon here is telling me that the item number is the key field, whereas over here it was showing in this box. So it looks a little bit cooler. There's a few different snazzy things with it. And we also get the SQL script here. So if you are savvy with SQL, you can copy this, come over into your SQL server, and just take a look at the underlying data. So this is, again, in the Fabricam test company. So we can see some of the items, and we see that the field names line up with what we were seeing in this panel here. So that's pretty great. It does show all the same information that we had over here, but it's all in one window, so it is more friendly. However, if you don't have this add-on, don't worry, because you can still get all the same data out of the description resources that are within GP. So from here, if we want to create an Excel report, what we can do is we highlight the table in the table finder that we're interested in. So in this case, it was the item master. And then they have a button down below called Create Excel Report. I'll click on that, and then you have to give an ID and a name for it. So I'll just call it Item Demo. Save that, and it will open the Excel Report Builder. So now that we have this screen open, it might be familiar to you if you're used to using Smart List. It has a very similar look to it and feel. So we have the tables on the left-hand side. At the moment, we just have the one table, Item Master. We can add tables to it, we can remove tables, and we can edit the selected table that we have. And then on the right-hand side, we have all the details for the fields. So we have the names of the fields, we have the display names, and that's going to be how it's going to show on the report. So if I don't like the name item number and I want to change it, then I can do that in here, and that's what's going to show up on the report. And then we also have this check box right by display, which is going to specify what will show up on the report. So if you want, you can say mark all, and it will just bring everything into the report. Or you can unmark everything and select specific ones. So in this case, maybe I want item number, description, the type, the current cost, and then I see, well, we've got this IV index. And I know what this field is because over in our table description, I saw that this field joins up with our account table. So maybe I want to bring in that account table because I want to get those details joined together and I want to show it all on one report. So I'll click the plus button, which is going to add a table, and I'll select GP table. So I'll come here and I'll select GP as the product. This time for series, we want it to be financial because we want to bring in the account details. And I'll open up this drop-down list. And I see here there's a few different account master options. There's account index master and account master. So maybe I'm not sure which one I'm interested in. Well, I can select one of them and come over to this hyperlink on the table. When I click this, it's going to bring up the table details. So this is very similar to the details that we're getting over on the table description. So we can see that the SQL name is GL00100. We get some of the field names. I can scroll down through it. None of them really sound like the account number itself, but if I want, I can take the SQL script And we can run this to see what's actually in this table. So I can see that while it does have the account number, it's actually split between 3 fields. And it has the account description, but I was actually wanting the account number. And I don't see that anywhere in the table. So maybe that's not the table for me. So let's look at the other one, the account index master. So now I'll hit the hyperlink for the table, and I see a field called account number string. So I feel like this is the one that I want. But let's take the SQL script, and let's see what the underlying data looks like. And I see that while it does break them out into separate fields, there's also this field where it's combining it all into one string and one field, which is exactly what I want. So now I know the table that I need to bring in the account. So I'll hit OK. Then you have to specify how you're going to link this new table to the existing data that you have. So far we only have the item master table, so we'll leave that as is. And we're going to want to join it as an equal statement. So now let's add the fields that we want to be equal. So very similar to the table section, we can add, remove, and edit our link fields. So we don't have any right now, so we're going to hit the plus button to add some. And in the item master, we know it's that IV index that we want. So we'll scroll down until we find that field. And in the account index master, we're also going to be looking for our index. So we can hit save here. And now we've joined these two tables together. And now we can see our items and see the accounts that they're associated with, and we'll get the actual account number. So from here, right now we're looking at the field section. We don't have anything selected, so right now we're only looking at items. But if I want to, I can display the account number string because I know that's the field I'm interested in. And if I want to flip back because I'm not sure what I selected for item, I can click on that, and the fields will update so that they show what's in that table. So you can go back and forth as needed. So now that I'm happy with what I'm going to bring into my report, I'll click Publish, and this will generate our Excel report. So I'm going to leave most of the options as is because I want the file to keep the name that it's generated based off the report ID. There is some options on where you're going to publish to, so this is where the Excel report is going to be saved to. In this case, it's selected Reports Library, but you can also do it to a SharePoint or any regular file that you want. I'm going to keep it in the Reports Library, and in a moment, I'm going to show you exactly how you can find that. So product, GP, inventory, that all sounds good. And there's also a permissions button down here. So if I click on that, I can specify which roles I want to give access to this Excel report. So I'm happy with all that. I'll hit OK, and I'll hit Publish. So now that that is generated, we're going to look back on the share location for the Excel reports. So that is set up when you install GP, but maybe you didn't configure it, or you're not sure if it was, or you don't know where its current location is. So you can find that by coming up to the big GP button, and then Tools, and Setup, System, and then down at the bottom is Reporting Tools Setup. So when we click on that, we're going to go to the Excel Reports tab. And here, we're going to see the location. So I now know that the report that I just built is saved in localhost reports. So that is good to know. And if it's blank, then you can click this button and just add a location that you want to add in. And then down here, there's an option to deploy default reports. So if you want to build a whole bunch of Excel reports, then this is a good option because it's all going to be already developed by GP, and it's a good starting point. So right now I can see that it's been deployed. Reports for one company are deployed is the message. So this tells me that it's already deployed, but if it wasn't, I could expand the plus button, and I would see each of my companies listed here, and I could check off whichever ones I wanted to deploy reports for, or if I wanted to deploy it for all of them, I would just click it up there, and then you select the Deploy Reports button, and that's going to generate some default reports. So let's go take a look at those. So if I go into my File Explorer, I know that it is in localhost reports. And then from here, we can see that we have two folders. So we have our data connections and we have our reports. Well, the data connections, I'm sure those are great. So I'm just going to go into the reports because I want to see the final report, the final results. So this is now going to list all the GP companies that you have. In this case, I only have the Fabricam data, so all I have is 2. So I'll select that, and then I see some different GP modules. In this case, we were in the inventory module, and we saved it in that spot, so I will open this up. So from here, the ones from here down are all default reports that by going through that previous screen in GP and deploying the reports, these will all be created. And you're going to see similar ones in all the different modules. So all the ones here, these are all default ones that were generated by GP. So that is really great because then you have some samples that you can work off of. So let's open up one of these. And the first thing you're going to have to do is enable the content, and then it's going to be able to pull the data. So this is one of the default ones, not the one that we just built. But we can see that it's pulling all of this data out of GP. If we want to see how it's pulling it out of GP, we can come up to this top tab for data. And if you click on that, then there's a Queries and Connections section. And if we click on Queries and Connections, then it'll open up all possible connections that we have here. We just have the one. If we double click on that, we can go into its definition, and we can see the query that it's using here. And then what you can do is you can alter this to create your own report. So you can copy this Excel file exactly as it is, paste it somewhere else, change it, make any alterations that you want. For instance, I see that it's only looking at where the quantity on hand is larger than the order up to level. So if you want, you could get rid of that filter. So maybe I'm only interested in quantity on hand and all the fields after that I don't want, so I can just delete that. I can hit OK. Do you want to make the changes? Yes. And then I can see that it's updating my results here based on what I've done to the connection string. So this is really great. If you don't have the Smart List Builder add-on, you can actually have a whole bunch of reports available to you just from within GP. And then you can use them as samples to then go in and build your own reports as you need. So now I'm going to go back to the one that we just did with the Excel report builder. So let's open that up.
Laura, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
When does this refresh? Is it every time you open the Excel sheet, it goes and talks to GP?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to refresh it, if you go back to that data tab, there's actually a refresh button, and you can click that and it's going to refresh the data set. Otherwise, it is to the last time you refreshed it. So where I just recently have deployed the reports, this is fresh data, and I haven't done much in this test company, so it is all up to date. But if it wasn't, then I could come into the data tab and click refresh, and it would make sure everything was refreshed. Right now it's just complaining because I haven't enabled the content yet. But once you do that, then you can refresh it. So you can refresh as frequently as you want. So I can go to enable the content, and we can see the data. And again, this is the one that we just built in the Excel report builder. So we can see we have our inventory data, and then at the end, we have details about our account. And we can see the account strings. So if we want to see what this one looks like in the back end, we can go to Queries and Connections. We can double-click that connection, come over to Definition, and we have our SQL code here. So we can bring that over and take a look at what's happening in the back end. And we can see that it's pulling the same details. We have the inventory details, and then we have the account at the end. So if we wanted to make any changes to this in the future, then we could tweak this SQL code here. And like Scott mentioned, we have the refresh button here. So if an item has been inserted and it's not showing up in this report, then we can hit refresh, and it will just do a quick refresh to get the most recent data. So that's great. You've got all your data here, but maybe you want to do some different things within Excel. You want to create some visuals maybe, or drill down on some of the data. So there's a few options that we can do. So we can come up here to where there's this little arrow in between the A and the 1. That's going to select all of our data in this tab. And then we can come up to Insert, and then there's the Pivot Table option. So it's going to give you a few options. It wants to know the data that you want to analyze. So in this case, I want to look at all of the data that we've pulled out of GP, and then choose where you want it to be placed. And I want it to be in a new worksheet because I want to keep this one as just our data. So I'll hit OK. And now I can start playing around with the details here. So maybe I want to look at the number of items that we have. So I can bring that into values. And then if there's other details that I want to know more on, such as the item type and the account numbers, then I can start dragging and dropping those in down below. I can set the rows, columns, values, and even add filters if I want. And for instance, now I know that 21 of the items are in the 1300-02 account and their sales inventory type, whereas all of our other items are in the 1300-01 account, and they break out to be mostly sales inventory, but we have some that are kit and some that are services. So this can be great if you want to really dive into your data. The pivot table is a great option. There is another option that's really great for a more visual side of things, and that is the pivot chart. So again, we're going to make sure we have all of our data selected, and we'll come up to Insert, and we'll come over to the pivot chart, which is right here. So select the table. We have all of our data selected, and then we can put it in a new worksheet or an existing worksheet. So I'm going to put it in an existing worksheet because I want it to be at the same spot that we have our pivot table. I can hit this arrow, which is going to let me choose where I want it to be placed, or I could type in the location. But if you're not familiar with Excel or how to type that out, then this is a great option. So I'm going to click that first tab that we had, and I'm just going to put it a bit below the pivot table that we already have. And then I'll select this button, which is then going to populate that exact location into this box. So now I'll select OK. And we see that we have another pivot table object, but it's also created a pivot chart object. So from here, maybe since it's a chart, I might want to look at each individual item, and maybe I want to see them by their current cost. So that is a lot of data. So maybe I'm only interested in the top 10. So there's a few options that you can do over here to kind of drill in further. One of which is you can come to the value filters and select top 10. So right now it's saying show top 10 items by the sum of the current cost. So I'll click OK. So these are the items that have the highest cost, the top 10. So that's pretty good, and I like the way this chart looks. Now it's a lot more readable. And as I refresh my data in the Data tab here, it will update this chart because the underlying data is updating, so this will update. But again, it's kind of at different heights. Maybe I want to show more of a linear graphic to kind of see how our data is doing. So there are some sort options. I can sort by the item number itself, or I have some more options. And I can say that instead of the item number, I want to sort by the current cost because I want to see from the highest cost to the lowest cost. So I'll click OK, and that not only updates our pivot table, but it also updates over here. So now I can drag this up, and we see more of a linear pattern. We can play around with this chart a bit if we want. We can have it look a different way. So maybe I like the way that looks. You can kind of play around with whatever you like. And now that we have the chart, maybe I don't really have a need for the pivot table that showed up down below. So I can highlight those rows and then right-click and select Hide. So now I can see the details as well as the data. So today we've created a simple report based on inventory and account data where we created a pivot table and pivot chart in Excel. You can use the resources we've learned today to build more complex reports. As an example, here at Endeavour, we built an Excel report with pivot tables that we use to manage the entire company's projects and consultants for tracking hours and projections. So if the data is in your GP application, you can use the tools learned today for effective reporting within Excel. And I do want to show you if you want to alter the report and you have the Excel report builder, because it is a great tool. So let's say you wanted to make changes to your report after you saved it and you don't want to go through the SQL side and you have that Smart List Builder add-on. Then you can come up to the GP button, come down to Tools, and then in the Smart List Builder section, there's the Excel Report Builder, which if I open this, I can select my report ID, which was the item demo, and I can make any changes necessary. So maybe I wanted to add some fields in. So I can add them to our display section, and then I can just save it. But what I actually need to do is hit publish if I want to see the results pushed up to our Excel report that we have. So I'll hit publish, and I'll leave this all the same so that it's on that same report that we have. Actually, I'm first going to save this, make sure it's not complaining, and I'll just publish that. And now if we go back, you can see that we have the fields added in. Now, one thing to note from this is if we update the SQL by going through data and queries and connections, then this will just update the underlying data that we're grabbing, and it's not going to refresh the entire report. And one thing you might notice is that by doing it through that Excel report builder, we lost our pivot table and our pivot chart. And so that's an important thing to remember, is that if you go through the SQL, it's only updating the actual data in the background, and it's not going to change anything on the report itself. Whereas if you go through the Excel report builder tool, which you get from that Smart List add-on, then it's actually going to completely push the report out new. So it's going to replace everything that you've already got and send out a new copy. So if you have changes in place, that's a good thing to know so that you're not overriding what you've already done and deleting everything. So one last thing I want to show you is the eConnect Programmer's Guide. So I'll just come back over here. And I'll come to this screen. And the eConnect Programmer's Guide is a great additional tool for finding GP fields and some of the data requirements that GP has. So eConnect is an XML layout that integrates with GP. And you might notice that we're looking at an older document. This does say GP10. However, if you look at some of the more recent ones, they don't include the schema reference, which is actually what we're going to be interested in looking at today. So if I come over to the schema reference, we're going to see that it breaks it out very similar to our GP modules. So we can see that we have inventory as an option here. So I'll click on that, and then it breaks it out by different categories. So we have item currency, item price list, item class, a whole bunch of different options, and at the very bottom, we have our item master. So if we're looking for those item details, this is probably a good place to start. And you will notice that there is some different naming conventions than what you're used to, and that's because while eConnect has the same data requirements as GP since it's integrating into it, it does have different schema node names, and these are based on the actions that you're performing into GP. So we'll see that we have item site, we have create item price list, we have update create item currency, we have update create item. So while it does have update create, normally after that it says what it is inserting into or what it is updating. So in this case, if we're looking for items, then it will be the update create item record. So if we click on that, then we can see the details a bit further. So this is going to line up with the fields that we have in our GP table. So this element name, these are the names of the fields that we have in the SQL table, and then we get a few more details about the data itself. And one that can be very useful is we have this description column, which tells you a bit about what the data is that's stored in it, but it also gives you details when there is a specific list of options that you can choose from. So if we look at item type, for example, in GP you can enter sales inventory, discontinued, kit, miscellaneous services, and flat fee. But on the SQL side of things, it's actually going to store numbers from 1 to 6. So if you don't know that and you're building your own report within Excel and you're doing it on the SQL side, then you might want to add something in so that when it sees a 3, it's going to replace it with the word kit. So that's just a cool little add-on that we have, which is just a good way to understand the underlying data because it does line up with what we have in GP. So I want to thank you all for your time today, and at this point I will pass it back to Scott.
Thanks so much, Laura. That was fantastic. And as a special gift for those that have attended today for Training Tuesday, we'll post a link to a zip file that will contain that table array that Laura had posted for eConnect. For those that are new to Endeavour, we've been around for 30 years now, 550 active clients across Canada and the U.S., 3 lines of business: advisory services, implementation, and ongoing optimization and support for clients using Dynamics GP, Dynamics Nav and Business Central, Dynamics 365 and CRM, and all the cloud products from Azure and Office 365. We have offices in Toronto, Halifax, Montreal, London, Edmonton, and Ottawa. On to the next slide. If you need to reach out to us, contact Trish, James, or Steve. We're happy to help. You can also reach out to our support team, and any one of us will be pleased and eager to assist you in your needs. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time today, and thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Scott.
And I have one question that I see has been asked by someone. How do we get the Excel report builder in GP?
Yeah, so to get the Excel report builder, it's actually included in that SmartList Builder add-on. So if you get the SmartList Builder, then you have access to it, which you could kind of see when we were over on the GP side, because to access it, you go into the Tools and SmartList Builder, and then it's within there that you get the Excel report builder.
That is where GP Table Finder comes in as well. That is part of that add-on for SmartList Builder. We do find a significant number of our clients do have it, and hopefully those in the line do have it, and if not, then you can reach out to Trish, James, or Steve and inquire about what it takes to be able to find those add-on tools.
And even if you don't have it, there's those great options of using the resource descriptions that are built in and those Excel reports that we deployed, because those are available in all GP options.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate you including that. Let everyone have a fantastic day and look forward to seeing you on our next Training Tuesdays.